Good morning. Welcome to Meet the Journalists, McClatchy, California's 2021 Funder Impact Forum. I'm Colleen McCain-Nelson. I'm the executive editor of the Sacramento Bee and McClatchy's regional editor for California. I want to thank you for joining us today. And more importantly, I want to thank each of you for supporting local journalism that makes a difference in our communities. We have a lot to celebrate today, and I'm excited to talk about the high impact work that our funder-supported journalists are doing in our California newsrooms. We thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce you to some of the reporters and editors in our journalism labs and share some of the successes from our California newsrooms. So let's dive right in. To kick us off, I want to share with you a recent investigation that our Fresno Land Lab published in the Fresno Bee. Our reporters gave a voice to residents who were living in an apartment complex with mold, with broken windows, in some cases with no heat, no hot water, and no real hope of getting the city or their landlord to take action. Fresno Land's work had an immediate impact on these residents' lives. And I'll let the reporters who uncovered this important story share more in a short video.
So at Fresno Land, engagement reporting is really the core at our approach to journalism. And what that means is that if we're writing about an issue, we first spend a lot of time investing in listening to community members that are directly impacted by that issue. Hi, my name is Monica Vaughn. I'm a water reporter with Fresno Land.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Garibay, and I am a housing reporter with Fresno Land.
I feel really lucky to work for a lab like Fresno Land because we are able to have the time and focus to work on investigative stories that are driven by community wants and needs. Fresno Land is a team of investigative reporters who are focused on water and housing and neighborhood inequality issues in the central San Joaquin Valley.
The work that we do is really important because we're not just reporting on communities, we're reporting for communities.
We can focus on serving communities that maybe can't afford a subscription and communities who have never seen themselves reflected in any kind of complex way by traditional media. So I actually tweeted out, has your rent gone up during COVID-19? It might not be legal. Text me if you have questions. And a woman reached out to me and said that their rent had been increasing over and over again, and at the same time, nothing was getting fixed. So I set up a time to meet with her, and it turned out that there were a lot of people in her apartment building that had similar experiences. So after I met with her and heard her initial story, I just went door to door, listening to different tenant stories.
My whole apartment, every single room, every inch of floor, everything was completely flooded. All my rugs underwater, my kids' toys, my bed, clothes, shoes, everything I had to throw away because it was completely wet.
And even after we had spoken with her, months afterward, the landlord had never sent anybody to look at the damage or to repair it. And that creates real health hazards for that family.
Cold water, no go. Hot water, no go. This man's a bum. He's a bum, and I tell him in his face what he is. He's a racist bum.
When we were ready to publish the story, our goal is to create change and to protect these residents. So I actually contacted the city council member for that district before the story published and told him what we saw at the apartment. And we told him how bad it was. And he said, you're kind of the gatekeeper here. Those residents haven't contacted me and I don't know how to reach out to them. And so I facilitated a meeting between the residents and their city council member. I was not there to advocate for a policy, but I was there to provide an opportunity for residents to speak directly with their representative.
When we went door to door, we went back several times. I believe we went to that apartment complex 4 or 5 times. And so residents, after the second or third time, started to feel a little more familiar with us and shared more of their story. It's very easy, especially when people are fearful of losing their housing, for them to just say, oh, there's nothing wrong, when we can see visible, a broken window or exposed wires. But it takes time to build that trust. And so we were grateful to have that time and support from our editors. When we published the initial investigation, the next day they had 50 code enforcement officers out there.
I think it's great that they're out here today. It's a shame that it took us doing an article in the Fresno Bee for it to happen, especially as much as it's happening right now. I mean, tenants have already said that they've been calling code enforcement, and now they seem to be taking it seriously.
The work that we're doing here at Fresno Land should be replicated across the country. Local news is the most important place for journalists to observe and to listen to how real people are affected by the policies that government makes.
I've really been inspired by the work that Fresno Land has done on that story and a number of others. And that's just one example of the impact that our lab reporters are having in our communities. And in a few minutes, we'll talk more about each of our journalism labs in California. But first, I wanted to give everyone a broader perspective on McClatchy's mission and our priorities. And so I'm happy to welcome Kristen Roberts, McClatchy's Senior Vice President for News, to the conversation. Kristen has been an incomparable advocate for our newsrooms. She is charting the course for all 30 of our news organizations, keeping us focused on delivering news and information that is essential to our audience, and working to ensure that McClatchy is investing in journalists and in local journalism. So Kristen, I'm so happy you could join us today. Thank you for being here. And I wondered if you could start us off by providing a little bit of an overview of where we are today in McClatchy and where we're headed. What's the state of the union, if you will, in McClatchy?
Colleen, thank you for that introduction. And my goodness, you should feel so proud after watching that video. Thank you and hello to everyone who's joined us on this call today to talk about our journalism, to talk about our mission, the mission of our newsroom, certainly in California. And I'm happy to talk about our mission across the country. It is one and the same. The local news sector has navigated multiple crises over many years. And here at McClatchy, it was only a year ago that we faced the challenge of simultaneously grappling with COVID's impact on our communities and on our business, while our own company was moving through a restructuring process. Colleen, you remember this, that at times felt at minimum uncertain. And throughout this entire period of time, McClatchy's commitment to our mission of independent local journalism that serves the public has held steadfast. You can see that really in the quality of the work our newsrooms are producing, the accountability journalism, text and video and audio, in the coverage that is first and best when news is breaking. You can see that this morning in Miami, where a tragic story is unfolding. You also can see it quite clearly in this leadership team's commitment to funding our newsrooms. I think it's both important and relevant to this conversation, Colleen, to note that and to remember that over the last 2.5 years, not even one local journalist in a McClatchy market has lost her job, been furloughed, or faced some cut to her pay, even in the face of a pandemic that devastated the economy and our industry. And this commitment to funding our newsrooms has strengthened since our emergence from bankruptcy under new ownership. Since, what was it, September of 2020, when we emerged as a new company, we have added beats, we have added jobs, we've hired rookie reporters and veterans. We've been able to lure truly exceptional leadership talent to our newsrooms, and we're now investing in our news products. And I think notably, as a new company, we've extended parental leave to our employees for the first time ever. And we've set a minimum salary in our newsrooms. That makes us the first local publishing company to take such a step. So the very best evidence of this investment in our journalism, I think, Colleen, is on full display in one of your newsrooms in Sacramento, where the Bee is fundamentally reinventing its daily newspaper into what I consider to be an extraordinary journalism moment on Sundays and on Wednesdays. It is both visually stunning and deeply reported. It's now a daily newspaper whose relevance stretches beyond the morning to last for days and even weeks, a lot like a magazine cover would. And a great deal more investment is coming. It's so exciting and motivating in California newsrooms and across our McClatchy markets. And that's because this is a company that really does believe in the power and importance of local journalism. It's a company where we recognize the honor of doing this work, of getting to do this work, and the responsibility, Colleen, I think, of doing it well, doing it for the benefit of our customer, who's our reader and our viewer and our listener and our neighbor. And so under your leadership in California, in the coming weeks and in the coming months, I think everyone on this call will begin to see and more importantly, to feel an ever greater commitment to community engagement and to equity issues and to solutions journalism, importantly, solutions journalism. That's what we here at McClatchy believe is essential in the lives of our neighbors and in the lives of our audience members. So Colleen, I hope that helps set the stage for this conversation, and I'm very eager to take whatever questions you got for me.
Well, those are really helpful insights. And Kristen, I'll just echo that I'm so energized by the initiatives that we're launching in California and the investments that we're making in our newsrooms. I know that there are more good things ahead. I did want to ask you some of the questions that have emerged in my conversations with our funders and our supporters. And I'll just start with this. I've heard this question frequently. I suspect you have as well. So let's just start here. There are concerns about a hedge fund owning McClatchy. Has the company mission or the commitment to local journalism changed?
It's the right question, and I do receive it a lot. And so I'm glad that you are asking it on behalf of the people on the call. Our commitment to journalism has not changed, and it will not change. And indeed, I think it is stronger than I have seen it. The change you can see is in how we are going to be delivering the journalism. You're going to see improvements in the products, from the newspaper, as we just discussed, to digital. And at all points on that print to digital continuum, I think you'll feel a more robust experience in print. I think you'll feel a more kind of full and satisfying digital experience on our sites. Our sites will begin to feel like portals to our communities. You will not see a change in our mission. Our newsrooms continue to create deeply important work. Every day, more members of our communities are being engaged in this work. We are holding the powerful to account, right? We are ending the careers of corrupt politicians. We're telling full and complete and nuanced stories about communities who have received weak or negative or frankly unfair coverage in the past. And we're doing that by doing more, by hiring and investing and recommitting in every way to our mission. And Colleen, if you'll allow me, I just want to put a very fine point on this for everyone on the call. The only thing that has changed under new ownership is that our newsrooms are growing. We are growing again.
That's fantastic news. And I'm really thrilled to be a part of that effort. And I'll tell you, Kristen, that one of the most gratifying parts of this job as I've arrived in California has been also just the support that I've felt in our newsrooms from our communities and from the partnerships that we've forged. And with the help of philanthropic support, McClatchy has also been able to add some jobs across the company. And in California, we've launched 5 new labs in 3 of our newsrooms. Could you talk a little bit about the impact that funding has had in terms of expanding our coverage and connecting with our communities?
Well, expanding our coverage, listen, it's been crucial. I think most notably in our newsroom's ability to experiment with new beats, to experiment with coverage areas. And in California, as perhaps this group knows better than anyone, Community support helped us explore what we could do if we were to dedicate with intention some focus on water issues, on development issues, on housing issues. It gave our newsrooms some space to explore better methods for engaging our audiences, for connecting with people who are underserved or unserved. In Sacramento, the support was crucial to allowing us to launch the Equity Lab. And I think that space to experiment is incredibly valuable, right? It gives you, Colleen, and all of your newsrooms the ability to test ways to reach people from all parts of the community. And it gives the team the opportunity to try things, especially in moments where there is not a demonstrated or obvious or assured audience. It creates the opportunity for us to try new approaches to prove the concept, right? And it also creates opportunities for very interesting partnerships, both with foundations and with other news organizations. So I feel grateful and gratified that we've been able to garner this support from the philanthropic community, because ultimately it helps all of us pave a path to a sustainable future.
Well, I will tell you, it's been really exciting for me to have that space and the ability to experiment and try new things and find new ways to reach our audience. So I'm just very appreciative for that. I'm interested, Kristen, in how you see philanthropic support fitting into McClatchy's plans going forward, both generally speaking and then also specifically in California.
Well, support that benefits local journalism, I think, remains a very important connection between newsrooms and the communities that those newsrooms serve. You know, as we just talked about just a couple of minutes ago or a couple of moments ago, the ability to experiment as we realize the very best way to serve communities is critical. And the role of philanthropy in this is important and certainly powerful, right? I mean, I think it's fair to call it powerful. I think philanthropic support for our local reporters and videographers and engagement journalists and editors, that remains a bridge to a fully sustainable future, which is the whole game, right? It is the entire thing that we are aiming for. And we're investing in our newsrooms because we believe that stronger newsrooms with more staff and better products put sustainability within reach. And we're moving quickly, we're moving carefully, but we're moving quickly to bring each of our newsrooms to this moment when revenue and expenses are properly aligned. And as we navigate through that phase, the support of people who see the value of a healthy local news ecosystem will act as sort of stabilizers in really choppy waters. Does that help answer? Did I answer that question?
Yeah, that's very helpful, and as we think about the bridge to the future, that will help us get to the other side and create a sustainable model. And you touched on this a moment ago, but the reporting positions that we've added to our newsrooms, you see some themes emerging, you see some commonalities. A lot of the journalist jobs that we've been adding have focused on issues related to equity, to economic mobility, to underserved communities. Do you think those coverage areas will continue to be a focus for McClatchy going forward?
I mean, absolutely. I think, you know, let's just take a step back for a second, right? I mean, the racial reckoning in our nation over the course of the last year and more was also a racial reckoning in our communities, and certainly one that affected our own company. And I think local journalism, for it to be good, not even to be at its best, but for it to be good, must reflect the full scope of human experience in a community. And local newsrooms have to ensure that they're reporting and writing stories that, what's the word, that absorb the complexity and culture of their communities. And so these positions in California, lab-funded positions, foundation-funded positions, have allowed for that level of focus. It leads to a richness and a depth that I think really comes from being truly a part of the community, the whole community. And we're committed to this approach, right? We're committed to this approach in our news coverage. We're committed to doing rather than just talking about equity and inclusion inside of our company and in the way we conduct business as a journalism organization.
I agree. I think we're embarking on this important work at a really pivotal moment. An important moment in our communities, and as you noted, it's an important moment in our newsrooms. But
and it's one that doesn't end. It's one that can't
Right.
end, right? It's one we can't get to a year from now and look back and say, okay, we did that thing. What's next? I think the key pivot moment is now. It is when we say, okay, we launched things, we needed to try things, and now we need to make sure that we don't just let it go. It needs to become part of our core operating, part of our performance, part of our what we do, part of our mission. And it is now, and we're feeling that in all of our newsrooms, especially in California, where you've been such a leader in this area.
This is absolutely knitted into the fabric of what we do every day. But we are doing that work at a complex moment. There's no doubt that there's still a lot of headwinds facing local journalism. What do you see as the path forward for our newsrooms? How do we ensure that we can continue to effectively serve our communities?
By hiring, by investing, by executing on culture change inside of our company, right? McClatchy is in the middle of a cultural transformation of its own. We're building an internal culture that is more diverse, that is more inclusive, collaborative, entrepreneurial, more so than it's ever been before. And we're making new hires, we're creating new programs, we're creating new processes, and all of it is designed really to support our newsrooms and to allow our newsrooms to do what they do best, which is provide news and information that our audience determines to be essential in their own lives. Now, there's really no question that there are headwinds. There have been headwinds for 2 decades now, and that there are external forces that are beyond our control. We're witnessing it with another company right now, what happens under different structures, right? But what we can control is our own culture and our own content, and one drives the other. Our investment in our newsrooms and our financial future are inextricably linked. There is real appetite for in-depth, high-quality journalism, and that is what differentiates us. And so we're leaning into that.
I'm definitely leaning in, and I will tell you, I feel really fortunate to be part of this building effort. As you noted, there's a lot of inspiring and important work happening right now. So thank you, Kristen, for leading this charge, and thank you so much for being part of today's conversation.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks to everybody for spending time with me. I appreciate it.
Now, before I introduce our next journalist, I wanted to provide everyone with a status update and tell you a little bit about each of our journalism labs in California. McClatchy, as you probably know, has newsrooms in 5 California cities. We're in Sacramento, Fresno, Modesto, Merced, and San Luis Obispo. And thanks to your support, we now have funder-supported labs in 3 of those newsrooms, and we have ambitions to continue to expand that effort. And so, as you can see here, during the last 2 years, generous support from foundations and from our communities has allowed us to add 21 journalists to our newsrooms. That's a pretty amazing fact, and your support has allowed us to go deeper and to cover our communities in new and meaningful ways. So I just want to pause there for a moment on that number and say thank you for making that possible. The journalists, as you're seeing in this event today, the journalists we've added to our newsrooms are thoughtful, they're energetic, they're diverse, and they're really helping us to connect with new audiences and build new relationships in our communities. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about them and about our labs. First up is the Sacramento Bee's Equity Lab, which is an important part of our newsroom here in Sacramento. As you can see, our Equity Lab reporters cover an array of beats ranging from housing inequities to Black communities to economic mobility to Latino communities. And you'll get to hear from the editor of the Equity Lab in a moment, but I just want to say that this team has done consequential work right out of the gate. They've written about disparities in vaccine access. The Equity Lab broke news about hazing and racist practices in the Sacramento Fire Department, which actually prompted the city to launch an audit. Our reporters have also told a lot of compelling stories about Black-owned businesses, about diverse emerging leaders in our communities, and other aspects of life in our communities that simply weren't reflected in our coverage in the past. Next, I'll tell you a little bit about the Fresno Bee's Education Lab. They cover higher education, early education, and K through 12 schools. And Ashley and Isabel and Rob have done so much essential journalism as schools have navigated completely uncharted territory in the midst of a pandemic. Stories that no one ever thought they'd be covering about schools. The Education Lab has produced more than 300 stories in the last 18 months, and they've found new ways to connect with their audience. They do listening sessions, they share community voices, and Fresno Bee editor Joe Kita is interviewing candidates right now for an open reporting position in the lab. So we'll be adding another reporter there soon. And I'm really excited about what's ahead for the Education Lab. Next, I'll mention one of our very newest labs, the Modesto Bee's Economic Mobility Lab. Our reporters in Modesto are focused on solutions to equity issues, and we have reporters there covering equity, education, and economic development. And Brian Clark, the editor of the Modesto Bee, has done a tremendous amount of great work to build support for this lab and to get off the ground this year. They're just getting launched. Reporter Emily Isaacman actually just started last week. So welcome to McClatchy, Emily. But it's worth noting that we have some pretty amazing reporters in our labs who do high impact, award-winning work. Christina Karish just won a California News Publishers Association award for her coverage of COVID's impact on businesses and essential workers. And we're thrilled to have Christina be part of the Economic Mobility Lab. You've already heard a little bit about some of the game-changing work that Fresno Land has done. The 4 journalists in this lab focus on housing, water, neighborhoods, and inequality. And we told you about their investigation into the Manchester Arms apartments. I want to note that they also, that their investigation into contaminated drinking water just won the top public service award in California's premier journalism contest. And the awards are great recognition, of course, but I think all of our journalists will tell you that they're even more proud of the fact that their work has had a real impact. Finally, I'll highlight another brand new lab in Fresno. The Central Valley News Collaborative is focused on journalism that shines a light on how the Central Valley's communities of color have been disproportionately impacted, both physically and financially, by the coronavirus pandemic. The Fresno Bee is working with our bilingual newspaper, as well as 2 radio partners, and Microsoft is also providing training and support for this lab. One exciting note is all of the content produced by this collaborative appears in both English and Spanish. So this is a great opportunity for us to reach new audiences on multiple platforms in 2 languages. And finally, I'll say that our labs have very quickly helped us cover some of the most important issues facing our communities. So we're already thinking about how we can build on that work. Here's a quick overview of the roadmap and some of the efforts we're undertaking as we look ahead to the future. In San Luis Obispo, we're working to add an affordable housing reporter with the help of community partners. In Merced, we're exploring opportunities to add reporting and editing resources. We're working to add a Spanish language digital journalist at Vida, our bilingual paper, and we're considering a membership model for Vida that could help ensure sustainability. And finally, we're also looking for opportunities for our labs to collaborate and to learn from each other. Now that we have 5 labs across California focused on many of the same issues, we have a really unique chance to develop best practices and to build some connective tissue among the labs, and also to take great advantage of our collective journalism firepower. So stay tuned, there's more to come. That's a quick look at all of our labs. And now I want to give you a chance to meet another journalist from one of our labs. So I'd like to introduce everyone to another talented journalist who's made an immediate impact in the Sacramento Bee newsroom. Kiana Williamson is the first editor of the Bee's Equity Lab. And while she's been on the job less than a year, Kiana and her team have made every single day count as they've worked to connect with new audiences, as they've worked to build trust in the community, to help our newsroom think about equity in new ways, and to report on stories that for too long, we simply failed to tell about underserved communities. So Kiana, welcome, and thanks so much for joining today's conversation.
Thank you for all the nice words, Colleen.
Well, so I'd love to start by letting everyone get to know you and your team in the Equity Lab a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? Tell us about your reporters and what everyone in the Equity Lab covers.
Yeah, so my name is Kiana. I am from Sacramento. If you're from Sacramento, I'm from the Oak Park area. I went to Keith McKinney, Kit Carson, Sac High, and then I went to Howard University. Before I was at the Sacramento Bee, I was at the New York Times, working on the other side of journalism, advertising side for the publishers of New York Times Magazine and T. We have an incredible team of journalists. We have Alexandra Yoon Hendricks, who's our equity reporter. She also covers housing inequities, and she has a slant towards writing for millennials. Marcus Smith, who is our Black communities reporter. We have John Park, who's our economic mobility reporter. Kim Barriquez, who is our RFA Latino communities reporter, and Orzo Haji Gerben, who is our engagement reporter, and she also helps with reporting on domestic violence.
You have a pretty amazing team. I wish they could all join us today because they've all just done fantastic work. So the Equity Lab was launched last year, and that happened after a summer of protests at a time when equity issues and systemic racism were front and center, not only in Sacramento, but in communities across the country. And so you had a really unique opportunity as the first editor of the Bee's Equity Lab. You had the chance to create something new, to blaze a new trail in our coverage at an important moment. And so it's hard to even know where to begin, but I'm interested in what your goals were for the Equity Lab during its first year.
Yeah, when we started, a lot like Kristen said, it was made very clear that we had solid goals, but that this was an experiment and we didn't quite know the potential yet for bringing in journalists who would cover critical issues and who would center new and diverse audiences. I told my team on the first full day, we're floating in the middle of the ocean here, and our goal for the first year is to build a boat. And then once we build the boat, we'll be able to see clearly, and we can build a bigger ship with more intention and direction and purpose, because McClatchy is pioneering this model and there's not a lot of places to look for examples. And so it's a long metaphor to say that my goal for the first year was to take in as much information as possible, learn as much as I could, as quickly and as efficiently as I could, and to think deeply about our mission and our purpose, so that we can build a community-funded, audience-focused journalism model that can add value to both our newsroom and our community.
I love that analogy, and you've done an amazing job building a boat in the middle of the ocean. There's no doubt that you've made an immediate impact, and the Equity Lab has so many great things ahead. I mentioned a couple stories that you've worked on, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about some of the stories that your team has reported on that have had resonance in the community.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were the defining voice in the Sacramento region regarding the vaccine rollout in all its facets. Consistently, the other papers were chasing us, and our coverage was relentless of the disparities that have forced officials to pivot and focus on equity as a main part of vaccine distribution. We've also covered cannabis, right? Cannabis is a tension point, I think, for Black communities, being the largest focus on the war of drugs and folks being, sent to prison for what is now, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so we were able to find a local angle to that story and help influence local decisions on a moratorium that would have stopped Black-owned cannabis businesses from being able to open in the Sacramento area. we reported, which was a really fun story, on the Sacramento Theater Company. They hope to have a festival to highlight diverse voices, but they did not cast any actors or playwrights or actresses who are actually diverse. And a lot of actors and actresses they were afraid to speak out because they didn't want to be typecast and not be able to star in future shows. And so after our coverage, it sparked a really productive conversation within the theater world here in Sacramento on how the theater company could be more reflective of the community that it serves. And so we've had awesome impact and success stories with our stories that have truly made a difference and made this work valuable and worth it.
They have made such a difference, and the Equity Lab every day is telling stories that no one else is telling, and you're telling stories that frankly the Sacramento Bee wasn't telling in the past, and so we're really grateful for that. And as you mentioned before, you don't have a lot of models to look at. You are blazing a new trail and creating something brand new. So I'm interested in how you're measuring success for the Equity Lab.
Yeah, I'm measuring success for the Equity Lab through how well we diversify the Sacramento Bee's audience. It's a formula to me. We write about what people care about. We write about the lives of those traditional media has not centered because news readership tends to skew affluent, white, older. And so we write about everyone else. And in return, they support us. Then we partner with community partners like you all and make you stakeholders, independent stakeholders with no influence on our journalism, but stakeholders nonetheless. And you help to hold us accountable because you're also serving these communities. And because you support us, we have more opportunities to hire more journalists from interesting and diverse backgrounds to do this dynamic and impactful work. I was telling a few of my colleagues the other day that there's no other newsroom in this country where I could go to my manager and say, hey, here's what the data is telling me. Here's my hunch. Here's what I think we should do. And he respond to me with nothing but support and a way to see it through. And so that's incredibly unique. And I would love to bring in more journalists to experience that in their career. So thank you.
I would too. that is our shared goal, and you've really hit the ground running in the Equity Lab. And I have to tell you, Kiana, that every day I look forward to working with you and your team. The chance to work with the Equity Lab was a great selling point for coming to the Sacramento Bee, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to team with the Equity Lab. So thank you for being an integral part of our newsroom, and thank you so much for joining us today, Kiana.
Thank you.
So I'm delighted to welcome our last guest to today's conversation. Priscilla Enriquez is the Chief Executive Officer of the James B. McClatchy Foundation. And as most everyone here knows, Priscilla has been a leading voice and strategic thinker on equity and so many of the same issues that we're focused on in our McClatchy newsrooms. Her work has changed lives for the better in the Central Valley, and the James B. McClatchy Foundation has been such a valued partner and a supporter of our newsrooms. So welcome, Priscilla. Thank you for joining us, and I'm eager to hear your perspective on why this work is important.
Oh, thank you so much, Colleen, and everyone for having me here. And I am going to share my screen and talk a little bit about our partnership with the Bee and what we're doing in the Central Valley. So first of all, I just want to thank Tim Ritchie, Colleen, Kristen, Kiona. It's been really inspiring to hear about your commitment to local journalism, to equipping your journalists with tools that they need, for updating, with technology and going digital. And so I'm really inspired by hearing all of that. And I also want to acknowledge the courage of everyone at the McClatchy Company for enduring and surviving the transition. I come from a different perspective and I represent a different perspective, and having me be a part of this presentation speaks a lot to your commitment to welcoming other partners and folks who are advocates for independent local journalism. So I'm going to talk about a couple things, but first I want to start with place, and I want to start with family and values. The James B. McClatchy Foundation is not affiliated with the McClatchy Media Company, so I just want to put that out there. We share the same name because a reminder that the McClatchy Company was founded in 1857 by a family who were pioneers in California around journalism. And they were very integral about place. And let me just give you a little picture of the Central Valley. I'm not so sure where folks are on listening, but look at the map of California. It literally is that large swath in the middle. It's the agricultural breadbasket for, the world probably. Home to 7.2 million people from a multicultural spectrum, speaking over 105 languages. So again, really happy to hear about the company's commitment to equity. 105 languages, that's incredible. Living in 19 counties across 20,000 miles. Right? So, and that's smack dab in the middle of the state between the Pacific coastline and the Sierra Mountains. And so literally the Central Valley is the heart of the state of California. So I lead with that because it just gives me a vision of why the work we do at the foundation is critically important. And the foundation was founded by James B. McClatchy, the late James B. McClatchy, and Susan McClatchy. And so it's important for us at the foundation to honor their vision, to honor the Central Valley, and the two areas that they care deeply about, English learners or dual language learners, and obviously the First Amendment. And I'm starting here with a quote from James back in 1999. Newspapers have personalities, are liked or disliked, and perform in many ways like people. Great numbers of readers consider their hometown newspapers to have a significant role in their lives, to be a personal friend or personal enemy, but a regular and important visitor. And again, really encouraged to hear the previous speakers speak about this. And we're here about that important visitor. The mission of the foundation is that we stand with the people of the Central Valley by investing in education and active civic participation in our democracy. So the other piece about the foundation is we are sunsetting. There's so much that needs to be done now rather than later. And the board and staff have ideated, where do we want to go? What's the end state, our destination state of where we want to be once we shut the lights and close the doors? And for us, it's creating this ecosystem in the Central Valley that fosters transparent, fact-based journalism that uplifts diverse community voices and stories, informing and empowering broad civic engagement. And behind all that, there's a lot of work, but really that's our destination state for our work in the Central Valley. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to advance this. So what we did in the beginning is we wanted to create a pilot program. We called it LIFT. And part of the work was to understand who was in the Central Valley doing this work around First Amendment, especially around civic engagement and local journalism. We wanted to establish a partner network that spans across the Valley. We had listening sessions up and down. It was important for us to listen to people, to represent their work, to honor their work. We formed 25 LIFT grantee partners investing in $1.2 million in local journalism, civic education, and civic leadership. We reached deep across the Valley in many counties. And we really wanted to understand and lift up what was happening in the Central Valley, knowing that this is the heart of the Golden State. And so much has been happening around First Amendment and civic engagement in the last several years. Out of that work emerged a strategy around civic engagement. We wanted to take a look at what was happening at the grassroots organizations around these issue areas of civic education, community media, local journalism, leading to First Amendment protections. And one of the things that I really value about the foundation is we really want to lift up the local voices, because we know that there's really great work happening in the local communities that sometimes, traditional news doesn't pick up. And these are just some quotes from our grantee partners. Representation matters where decisions are made, and that's at the local level. Civic unrest this year shows us the need for civic education. And with the erosion of local journalism, we seek to control our own narrative. And Little Manila Rising, and I'll just hone in on that for just a sec. They're a nonprofit based in Stockton, and you saw the change in the election outcomes of Michael Tubbs. With the demise of local journalism there, you've got a lot of misinformation, disinformation happening in the digital space. So we can see what can happen when there is a lack of transparency in journalism and in the local news ecosystem and in local community. Really glad to hear about the coverage that the Bee has with their media labs. JBMF, as we're affectionately known, has funded these labs across the Valley. Heard about the Ed Lab, the Equity Lab, and of course, we also want to bring in other partners. Report for America has expressed great interest in California, and we hope to see them here in the Central Valley at some point in the near future. I won't go into this because the folks at McClatchy already went over this, but I think for us, when you look at these labs across the state, across the Central Valley, we really want to knit them together, and it's lifting us an opportunity to create something new and hopefully lasting once JBMF shuts its doors. And it gives us this opportunity to knit a loose infrastructure. We want to lift up the existing lab work. We want to bring in and bring together these one-off investments, create entry points for new partners, all under the arc of our LIFT initiative. And we want to create an emphasis on a dynamic yet horribly under-resourced region in the state and country, our great Central Valley. We know that philanthropy has to grow here, and we're hoping JBMF could be that facilitator for those resources. So one of the things we're looking at as part of our sunset plan, and I'll share more as a foundation later in the fall, but we're looking at a Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. The board commissioned a feasibility study, which we hope to release in the next few weeks. We really want to protect, sustain, and grow newsroom jobs and cover capacity. We want to increase diversity of leadership and reporting workforce to reflect the community. We want to engage the next generation of consumers and stakeholders in helping shape their own future. Obviously, we want to support a local journalism ecosystem and its innovation, and of course, expand philanthropic investment in the Central Valley. And again, I'm really encouraged to hear about the McClatchy Company's commitment to this. And we hope to continue this partnership with you all, especially in the labs and in any other projects that might come out of these partnerships. And I'm going to close with this, again, with a quote from the late James B. McClatchy. So it is with us. News and editorial activities are the cutting edge of what we do, controversial, exhausting, and never ending. But it is the entire institution that must perform at a high level of skill and commitment, with all departments part of the defense of the First Amendment and free speech. The writers have the microphone, everyone else provides the electricity and makes the system work. And that is what we are trying to do, is to create a really grand ecosystem around independent local journalism in the Central Valley. And that's all I have. So thank you again. Happy to take any questions, Colleen.
No, thank you so much, Priscilla. It's inspiring to hear about your plans. I think we share so many objectives and share a lot of the same philosophy. I'm excited about the possibility of, as you say, kind of knitting together this infrastructure of labs and journalists across the Central Valley. So I'm eager to continue working together as partners. But thank you so much for those insights, and most of all, thank you for your partnership. I also want, as we wrap up, I want to thank everyone here for working with our newsrooms and for supporting our public service journalism. I've only been here a few months, but I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with our partners. My colleague Tim Ritchie and I feel so fortunate to have partners who believe in this work and who understand what an essential role local news plays in our democracy. As you heard from our journalists and from our leadership, McClatchy really is committed to serving our communities in Sacramento, Fresno, Modesto, Merced, and San Luis Obispo. And we have a lot more work to do, and we have a lot of ambitious plans for the future. So with that, I will wrap it up, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I look forward to continuing this conversation with each of you. Thank you for being here today, and have a great Thursday.